Hotepu everyone, this is His Majesty Ra Sumabathagbemi, the world's first openly African black gay pharaoh. And the role of pharaoh is to nourish and protect his people. And I was reading the text on the screen you see here. This is the opening chapter, the first plate of the book of Ani, the so-called Egyptian Book of the Dead of Ani. We call it the Book of Awakening God Within. And we have a calendar for how to use these scriptures. And on January 4th, we had what's called the perihelion, meaning the Earth was closest to the Sun. And that date marks the first day of Kemetic Initiatic School. The first day you will go to the School of Mysteries in Egypt. And we read one plate every 10 days. Or one deacon, or an Egyptian week of 10 days. So, if you do the reading of these plates at these 10-day blocks, as per the calendar from the perihelion date to the next one, very mysterious things start happening. Very almost magical and synchronistic things begin happening. So, we are now past, today's January 7th, 2022, we're past the dreadful replay anniversary, not replay, but anniversary of January 6th insurrection. And it's interesting to me that that occurred during this plate. So from January 3rd, 4th each year until about January 13th, 14th, every 10 days is one Egyptian week called a deacon. This plate activates around the world. Okay? And this plate talks about, we can actually go back. Let's see if I can click back to the text. I have a video on this plate on my YouTube channel. I think it's called Decoding the Ani Papyrus Plate 1 or something to that effect. But here it starts saying, a hymn of praise to Ra when he riseth in the eastern part of heaven. And the text goes on to talk about Ra as Kepara, which are patterns, fractal patterns, and seeing the patterns clearly with splendor, seeing the seasons of things, okay, looking at the north, south, east, and west here of your astrology chart, the ascendant, descendant, MCIC, and it goes on and on and on about praising, looking at astrology. Okay? So events that happened during this first 10-day week from perihelion until 10 days after that, the things that happen in that window must be carefully analyzed astrologically. Very carefully analyzed. So, in honor of that, I did so. And I found something very interesting that was quite striking. What I found was, let's pull up the charts here. So the inner wheel here is Saturn Pluto conjunction in 1784 in reference to black people. So this inner wheel here, what I'm clocking here is this purple and black planet symbol here. These symbols here. Saturn is purple, Pluto is black. This inner wheel is 1784, the last time that Saturn and Pluto were conjunct, meaning high-fiving each other, okay, in the same house and sign. The outer wheel is January 6th. Look at this. Pluto and Saturn again are conjunct. Okay. So this, the last time we saw this was 1784, and the treason was on 2021, several hundred years later. Okay, so this is a big deal, a somewhat rare event in terms of astrological time. But when we do world astrology, what's called mundane or historical astrology, you want to really watch the outer planets, which are Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, as well as Saturn and sometimes Jupiter. Okay, which we have in this case a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction, which happens every 20 years. Okay, but let's focus on the big players here, the juggernauts. That would be Saturn-Pluto in 2021, Saturn-Pluto in 1784. Now, in the text we just showed, it said, let's go back to the text very quickly. It said here, homage to thee, O astrology charts, O thou who has come as Kepera, which means repeating patterns, fractal patterns, iterations. A pattern that's very similar to a previous pattern, but slightly different with a slight tweak. Okay? So, if we go back to the chart, we see a pattern repeating. Saturn, Pluto, same sign of Capricorn. Saturn, Pluto, same sign as Capricorn. Note I'm using sidereal astrology, not tropical. You would not catch this pattern if you did tropical. Your dates would be off. Okay? Now, when Saturn and Pluto come together, historically, that's pretty violent time. Saturn is the structure, it is the government, it is the establishment. Pluto is the destroyer, the transformer, the dissolver, the killer. So here we have two antagonistic forces. Saturn, we call Harukapet, the government structure, and Pluto, this underbelly, this rebellious, treasonous, violent force. Pluto is also called Hades, the god of what they call of hell. So we have the government of Saturn meeting the hell forces of the infernos of Pluto. Okay? So historically, whenever these two planets conjunct or form major angles like squares, trines, or oppositions to each other, Saturn square Pluto, trine Pluto, oppose Pluto, etc., major events that deal with some kind of breakdown of the governmental structure, social violence towards the government or from the government, dictatorships, revolutions, these are very common. Okay, so that's a general rule, 101 astrology. That did happen in January 2021. There was a rebellious group of people, an underbelly, a very racist underbelly. Remember that the treason insurrection was led mostly by white males. And there's a lot of racism behind the MAGA movement, behind January 6th. And if we don't at some point discuss the racist origins of that movement that really kind of amplified after Obama's presidency, and we had the Tea Party rising, then we had this kind of undercurrent of white militia growing and growing and growing. And then Donald Trump came into office and he was overtly racist and he gave voice, stand by, he told the Proud Boys. He's giving racist groups the thumbs up. There were good people and bad people in the Charlotte event. So he gave voice to this kind of dark underbelly, this plutonic, creepy and vicious underbelly of racism. Okay? And what's happening is very reminiscent, but slightly different from history. In 1784, when this pattern repeated or had started. So we're going to go to a link here. This is called blackpast.org. It's a global African history timeline site. So we said, what was it, 1784, correct? Let's scroll down to that point in history. Okay, this site focuses on Black and African history because when you go to most history sites, world timeline sites, it's very Eurocentric, very Eurasian centric, and they really don't talk about Africa at all. But since the Great Treason insurrection was a racist driven event, you saw almost all white people, mostly white males. Okay, so we must look at the racist component of this. So here we have 1784 to the day, or to the year, I mean. Let's go through this a little bit. I'm going to show you how we're going to look at the past to understand the present and then the future. It says the Shelburne, Nova Scotia race riot. Look, a race riot is caused by resentment over David George, a black Baptist preacher, baptizing white residents and organizing racially integrated churches. So back when this happened in 1784, there was a riot based upon race. Okay, let's go back a little bit because what's called an orb, meaning a sphere of influence, where several years before or after a particular astrological conjunction, let's say, you feel the vibes coming in. The zeitgeist kind of comes in several years before and after the exact conjunction. But let's go to the top of this page. Let's just take a scroll perusal of what was happening in the late 1700s, early 1700s, early 1800s, okay? Okay, we have the African Empire of Dahomey is rising. Okay. We have the Lunda Kingdom rising. We have the Oyo Empire rising. Okay. 1750, the British take Grenada and introduce an economy dominated by slave labor. Okay. 1750, escaped, I don't like calling them slaves, they were prisoners of war, from other Caribbean islands, settle on St. Vincent, intermarry with indigenous Caribs, and become the Garifuna, okay, controlled by French settlers. They're not really settlers, they're parasites. Colonialism is a kind of parasite force, okay? Then we have Great Britain, control over Caribbean islands of Dominica. So we have, again, the Great British. I wouldn't call it Great Britain because it was not great what they did to Africa. We have here Abram Petrovich Hannibal, a former prisoner of war, who later becomes the godson of Peter the Great. Did you know that? Is appointed a general in the Russian army. A trained engineer, he oversaw various projects like the construction of Ladoga Canal and some Russian fortresses. Interesting. Okay, the Boers of South Africa, who began the apartheid energy, settle in South Africa. Portugal abolishes slavery. Now here we're getting, so we have a background of a lot of the great perversion of the slave trade happening. Okay, that's rolling. But then in 1761, okay, about 20 years before before Saturn and Pluto conjuncted, Portugal abolishes slavery in mainland Portugal and in its possessions in India. Okay, this is the turning point. Something's turning here. Okay, 1772. Around the summer solstice, Lord Chief Mansfield rules in the James Somerset case that an enslaved person brought to England becomes free and cannot be returned to slavery, laying the legal basis for the freeing of England's 15,000 slaves. So this is, as they have here, a major judicial decision. These are parasite conquests. It's kind of giving you the event and the location and the exact date range. Look at this. In the same year, slavery is declared illegal in England. Big turning point from the parasitical conquests. 1776, which many Americans would understand that year. Okay. Sultanate of Kilwa on the East African coast agrees to supply enslaved people from the interior for the French sugar plantations on Reunion. Okay. East African slave trade. Okay. So the trade begins to pick up. After these kind of checks on slavery, it picks up here. Okay. we next have here in 1781, Los Angeles is founded by 54 settlers, including 26 of African ancestry. Africans in colonial New Spain, okay? Okay, 83, we're now near 84. Approximately 3,000 black supporters of the British during the American Revolution were repatriated to British Canada at the end of the conflict. Okay, 83, some more parasitical conquests, and here we have the year in question, 84, when Pluto and Saturn conjuncted. So we have that background history. You must look kind of at the background before you discuss the main theme. And here we had when they conjuncted a race riot. Let's go a little bit forward now. 1787. Society for the Abolition of the Slave Trade is founded in London. Emancipation. The British abolitionists as a colony for emancipated slaves. Emancipation. And here's the big one. This is the onion, as they say in Egyptian. 1791, the Haitian Revolution begins. Independence. Okay, if we go to page 10, next page, see if it clicks us over. Okay, let's click the arrow perhaps. Okay. Okay, did we miss something here? Let's see, let's go to 10. There we go. Okay, we move on very quickly. 93, slavery is illegal in Upper Canada, emancipation. French abolishes slavery, emancipation. Then we have this kind of pushback, colonial quests, and then blacks are freed in Europe, independence, anti-slavery resistance, anti-slavery campaign, anti-slavery campaign, anti-slavery resistance. You see a pattern, okay? And on January 1st, 1804, only 20 years after 1884 pretty much, we have the Haitian French Revolution in full swing. Now, then we have West African empires, abolition of slavery again. Okay, you see the idea? On this page, we have a lot of emancipations, a lot of anti-slavery resistant categories. So what does this mean about January 6th? Well, January 6th, and I want to mention here this is an important one. This is the Haitian Revolution. This is a very important part of African history, Black history. The Haitians succeeded at defeating the French, the British, and the U.S. armies through the power of voodoo and their gods. This is a very important historical moment that Black leaders must study carefully. How did they do that? They defeated the greatest armies on the planet Earth and formed basically a Pan-African free state, because if you went to Haiti after that revolution, you were considered free. You could not be enslaved. Okay? So look at this picture carefully. Okay? This is, there was a saying I read many years ago that, is it the same thing if a slave master puts a knife in the back of its slave as a slave putting the knife in the back of its slave master? On the surface, they look the same. It's the same physical act. But the context and the intent is completely different. Right? If you are being attacked, bullied, and tortured, and you defend yourself, that's one thing. If you are the bully attacker and the antagonist, that's a different thing. Okay, so what you're seeing here is Africans in Haiti taking the knife out their backs and punishing those who put it there. This is righteous rage, righteous rebellion, freedom fighting from oppression and tyranny. Now, I picked this picture because it shows white males being killed, white males being defeated. Okay? And the males, they show them, I like this image because they show them in their regalia and all their pomp and circumstance. They show the Africans just very natural and earthy. And it implies that after all of that fancy regalia and all those things, they still cannot defeat the power of the African gods when they were unified, giving Haiti freedom. Okay? So this image is very important to our conversation. Here you see the dead white men who lost the war. You see the victorious black people who won the war. Where did these white souls go? Their bodies are gone. They're dead, of course. But where do their souls go? Where do their spirits go? Where do their ghosts go? Well, my assertion is they went to Washington on January 6th. My assertion is that January 6th is a several centuries old white male response to the loss of their power. We saw in the histories that around that time there's a lot of black liberation, black freedom, anti-slavery laws. So a lot of the white men, and I'm sure many of their white women, felt they were entitled to black people's bodies and to our labor, and how dare black people want to be free. And they had this idea of white male, I call it snivelage, not privilege, white male snivelage, where they think they deserve the world is theirs. It's kind of arrogance. And so during the 1780s and early 1800s, they lost their white snivelage and were bothered by it. I mean, that was so disturbing, it created a civil war ultimately. And then Lincoln and that whole thing came out of white people, white males in particular, angry at the loss of their assumed snivelage, privilege. And they didn't like it. And they went to war for it. So, as an astrologer, I say 1784 had a race riot to the year when Pluto and Saturn conjuncted, you see? Pluto 0 degrees, Saturn 8 degrees, here Saturn 0 degrees, Pluto 18 degrees. This was then, this is now, January 6th. The pattern's repeating. Okay? And because of this, I'm not going to go into it right now, but because of this Saturn, Jupiter, we should look 20 years before this date, which we kind of did. And we would see the beginning of this whole shift in the status of black people around the world. Okay, so I'm going to wrap this up by saying January 6th, to me, as a king high priest, I am a Babalawo, I am an Ifa high priest, I am a king, and I speak from those powers. And what I'm saying as a high priest king, to our eye, January 6th, and all that led up to it, you see, because Barack Obama was elected in 08, 012, and then Trump in 2016. So we had 8 years of black power. Okay? Just like in 1784, several years before that, we had a lot of rise in black power, and it got stronger and stronger and ended the great perversion trade. The ancestors, the ghosts of those who lost the Confederate War, who lost their internment camps, their genocide settlements, what they call plantations, but they're really genocide sites, torture sites for black people. They're not a plantation. They lost all that money. They lost their white snivelage. They lost their pride. They lost their masculinity. All these things that they valued were lost when blacks got power. When you listen to many historians analyzing January 6th, you'll hear a theme. It's racially originated. This is a racial movement. The Proud Boys and the KKK 2.0, and a lot of fear that in about 50, 60 years, it's called the browning of America. There will not be as many white people will become a numerical minority, and the USA will be brown and black more than white. So to racists, this is horrifying. This is horrifying. The whole impulse of racism is a kind of a deep psychological fear of many racist white people of genetic annihilation. Because black, when it mixes with white, makes brown, and white becomes erased. So there's this real fear that's very serious in racist white people that our numbers are dwindling, our genetics will be recessive compared to black input, and we can't go extinct. This extinction fear is what I feel is the origin of racism. Okay? So, January 6th, almost all white males, is an event that was inspired by the descendants of those white ghosts we saw on the Haitian Revolution, the descendants of those white torture farms, what they call plantations, that lost their money, lost their income, lost their prestige. All those ghosts didn't disappear. They try to influence their descendants. Okay? And those descendants try to invoke the memory of their racist ancestors, the statues, the Confederate flags, the gear and the guns. They want to make those ghosts come back to life, not let them be forgotten. The Confederate flag was actually carried for the first time since the Civil War through the Capitol building. So it's those ghosts and their descendants trying to keep their white snivelage alive, trying to hold at bay the genetic annihilation of white people. Not all white people are this way. That's why I say the racist ones. Okay? So, January 6th was now the descendants of these ghosts trying to prevent a future Haitian revolution, trying to ensure the domination of the whites over the blacks, and went to destabilize and tear down democracy itself, which white people invented. It's their own social structure is democracy. Africans are more a kingship system. And then we have the Republican Party instituting these very racist voting laws and repression laws and not decrying racist rhetoric in Congress and racist behavior by Senate people and politicians and enabling it. And this is very, very dangerous. It's very scary. And it's history trying to correct its incorrection, right? The incorrection was the racist policies of the past. Okay, so I just want to give a quick little take from an astrology angle, looking at history, what January 6th is all about. And with that, we will wind down. I pray that the world unifies. I pray that we all understand there is room for everyone on the earth, and that sharing is better than, oh, here we go, sharing, security alert, that's interesting, that popped up on my Norton. Perhaps we should be very alert to what's happening. The, the level of danger of the US democracy should not be underestimated. We should not take this lightly, what's happening. The abortion laws, which undid a constitutional law. Okay, the Texas abortion laws really, to me, besides being an attack on females' bodies, there's another not more, but another insidious layer to that. That was the first time that a state wrangled and wriggled to remove a constitutional law. Once that passed, it opens the door to any constitutional right being taken by a state. So the abortion issue in Texas has ramifications to men and women, all of us. Okay? So we have to decide what we feel is the country we want. Hold your ground. The freeing of the, not slaves, but prisoners of war was the right thing to do. That is the humane thing to do. Keeping them in chains would be the bad thing to do. How do you know? Because if you ask white people, do you want to be put in chains? They would say no. Therefore, they know it's not right. It's not the golden rule. So, having openness and freedom for all is the right thing to do. You don't have to like it, but it is the right thing to do. Okay? So again, I pray that the spirits of grace and our better angels prevail, and that we come to a place where all people have equal power and rights. This is only fair, and this is only just. Okay? And again, you would miss this historical parallel if you went by tropical astrology. They would say a different date. I think it's 15 something they say that Saturn and Pluto conjuncted. Okay? So, and they will miss the whole influence of the ghosts of the Haitian Revolution and of the torture farms, and how those ghosts have come back into January 6th to try to reclaim their so-called glory of the past, but the Confederates lost. They lost the Civil War. The South did not rise. The South is trying to rise again from the ghosts compelling their descendants. And we must be very careful about this and watch it with great care and push back so there's equality and fairness for all. So, I pray you enjoyed this. And remember, no matter what happens to you in life, always look up why, because you are a star. Dwalin Hotepu.